Hi, my name is John, and I'm an addict in recovery. And I'm gonna try to tell my story um, as short as possible. Um, when I first, like how I ended up becoming a recovering addict, and where I was um, 20, almost 26 years ago, um, before I came into recovery, and like I when when I first came into recovery, um, my addiction, my addiction had caused me to leave my wife and kids and go out. And I mean, towards the end of my recovery, I was like completely caught up in the addiction, using every day, and you know, trying to figure out ways to try to get more high, get high, and I was hooked on crack and and heroin at the time, and I left, and with a home to go to, I ended up living on the street, and I ended up like I'll tell you a little bit about how I ended up. I mean, it got so bad that one day I ended up going to go get some drugs and on the street, and it was where there was an abandoned building and everything, and I ended up going there, and the next thing I knew, like, I went to cop because they had like crack on one corner, dope on the other corner, they had a liquor store on the other corner, and everything that you could ever find on this block, when it came to drugs. And I went there to cop, and the next thing I knew, I ended up staying on that block. I couldn't get off that block, and I ended up moving into the abandoned building. And a lot of times I was living in this abandoned building. I called it abandonmenium, and I moved into the abandoned building, and I lived there for over a year, and I used to get mad when people came over, like people came over into the abandoned building, and I would get really pissed off for them showing up. But of course that's kind of crazy. But um, anyway, I lived there for over a year, and then I ended up, you know, um, you know, I when I got there, I was weighing like maybe 200 pounds or something like that, and by the time I left there, I was weighing about 100 pounds. I was completely uh, lost completely weight, and people weren't afraid of me anymore. I became like a dealer on that street, and you know, um, I ended up having to like rob the man that the guy who was applying me the drugs, in order for me to get chased off the street, because there was no way for me to be able to leave that street. And then I ended up living I went from there to New York City shelter, and I moved. I was in the shelter, and like towards the end of my addiction, like what I would do, like I mean like I was living in the shelter, and I always had a hustle, and I always try to make some money somehow, and I became the Lucy man, a man, like guy who sold Lucy's inside the shelter. And what I would do is like I would wait for people, to come back from their drug run, and they would come to the cafeteria and trade their food for cigarettes, and I would give them cigarettes for their food. And then that night I would wait for them to come back, to the shelter, and they would be hungry from, using all day, and they would, buy back, like with a couple of dollars that they would have left over, they would buy the same food off of me, that I had, stored in my locker, and that was kind of my life, towards the end. And like what ended up happening was my last hit was like I turned around and I took a hit of crack, and I ended up becoming really paranoid because like the drugs weren't getting me high anymore, and I became totally paranoid that if somebody would have came up to me at that time, I would have shit it all over myself, and I was living in Bedford, uh, um, Bedford and Atlantic shelter, men's shelter, and that's where I was at, towards the end. And my last run, I was sitting on the bed, being afraid of anybody coming up to me to buy cigarettes and stuff. And the crazy thing was that, after experiencing that all night and being afraid and paranoid, I ended up going and buying another hit and taking another hit, and I hit a crack, and I knew then that there was something wrong with me, and I ended up, like there was this guy who used to run up and down the drill floor, of the men's shelter, and he would scream NA. And towards the end, I went up to that guy and I asked him where there was a meeting to go to. And I ended up going to Narcotics Anonymous to a 12-step meeting. And, I got to my first meeting high, or, I had taken some drugs, that day. And, like, they told me to keep coming back. And I saw a lot of people there that were clean in recovery. And they were clean and they didn't look like addicts, and but I knew that they had been where I had been because of the way they were talking, because they shared things that only people that are in addiction have gone through. And I ended up, um, they told me to come back, to keep coming back and to come back clean the next time, and that's what I did. I took the suggestions. I made 90 meetings in 90 days. I got a sponsor. They told me to get a sponsor. They told me to get phone numbers at every meeting. I ended up, getting a lot of numbers, and I kept making meetings, and I made sometimes 3 to 4 meetings a day. I was still living in shelter for the first 90 days, and I ended up getting a job, and I stopped using. I started making meetings. It helped me to stop using, and they gave me some suggestions on things to do. And um, um, I read the literature. I read the basic text inside and out. I read a lot of it, and I ended up like going to a lot of meetings. A lot of meetings. And before I knew it, I got really familiar with the program. And before I made my 90 days, I moved into a working shelter. And from the working shelter, I ended up like saving up some money and being able to put money together after I got a job. And I got a job, I think 2 weeks, being in recovery. I ended up going and getting a job. And even the job that I had, I got the job. I saved up some money, and the next thing I knew, I was living in this recovery room in the shelter that I was at. And like I used to keep the slogans with me. Like I love the slogans, the slogans in recovery, like keep coming back, keep the focus on yourself, keep it simple. um you know there's so many slogans that I used to, it's 3 places that addicts have no business: the past, the future, and somebody else's business. Um, there's uh, you know, anyway, I used to take these slogans and like I would turn around and I had them hung up above my bed, and I would like grab a slogan, and it kind of helped me with working steps, like getting familiar with the steps, and I did a lot of like there was one that said analyze, don't, I mean utilize, don't analyze. And anyway, I took these slogans and I would like apply them on a daily basis, as much as I could, I go to work, and I make 3 meetings a day. Even though I was working, I was still making 3 meetings a day. And I was living in New York City at the time, so they had a lot of meetings out there. And I was living in Brooklyn, downtown, in a pretty rough area of Brooklyn, where they had drugs everywhere, and they had all kinds of stuff. I was still living in the shelter. And then like right before I made my 90 days, like I was able to put this money together, and somebody told me about a room, and I ended up going and renting the room and moving into the room. And when I picked up my 90-day key tag, I picked up my 90-day key tag, and I was living in a furnished room. So I had made like these these accomplishments, you know, um, as a result of making these meetings. And I ended up like making a lot of meetings. And my first year, I want to say I had a lot of fun. I learned a lot of things about things that I didn't think I could do. Like, I didn't know I could dance without drugs. And I ended up like going to like a lot of dances. And before I knew it, I was dancing on the dance floor like everybody else. And I used to think that everybody that was dancing was on something. And then I realized, like I used to even check the bathroom to see if they were doing something or if they were taking anything, but they were all clean and they were all dancing and having a good time. And I ended up learning to do that. And before I knew it, I was able to, um, celebrate a year. And I remember my first year, my wife at the time came to the meeting, and even though we've never got back together again, um, you know, um, I was able to make some amends with her and make amends with, like, um, as much as I could with family and stuff. And before I knew it, people wanted me to come over, and like they were wanting me to come to their house and stuff. Like they didn't want that before. Like before, they didn't want me. They would hide. And they would turn around and give me money to go away. you know um, there was so many things that I learned in my first year of recovery, about living, and I was able to like, rent this room, and then like, my first year I lost my job, and I came and, I lost my job, and you know I didn't know anything about unemployment, and I ended up getting unemployment, and I was like on unemployment for about a year. And but I kept making meetings, and I became like a street vendor. I sold stuff, on the street, and I was always, like doing stuff illegally. Even though like I was in recovery, I was still doing stuff illegally, like, street vendor. And you know and anyway, I went from that room to living in a basement apartment, and then from that basement apartment, I was like a maintenance man, you know, uh, they call it a superintendent. And I ended, and before I know it, I had like moved from there. I moved to another apartment, and I was working, as, a superintendent, and then I lost that job, and I ended up becoming a full-time street vendor selling bootleg movies, you know, um, you know, selling bootleg movies, but like because I had bought them, and I had bought them, and I went and I started selling them. And then the next thing I know, I was like thinking that I had my own business, and like I started like having like my own little business, and selling all kinds of stuff on the street. And the next, before I knew it, uh they started breaking down on people selling on the street. And I got arrested while I was clean, and I got really mad because they treated me like a criminal. The cops treated me like a criminal, but I ended up like um spending like 2 or 3 days in jail, waiting for to go before the judge. And I didn't really like that experience clean. Like I had never experienced that clean, and like I've, always was high when I got busted and stuff like that. And you know, yes, I had gone to jail while I was using quite a few times, and but this time I was clean, and I didn't like that experience. So like after I got out of there, like, they gave me like a fine, I paid the fine and I took care of that. And I also found out that I had a warrant, from like 3 years, 6 years ago, when I got arrested. And I went and I took care of that, and because I was clean, the judge like really gave me a break and told me to keep coming back. And he raised up his hand and he like said, yeah, you go, because they had taken pictures of me when I was using. And then they looked at me, the way I was then, and I looked so different, that they were like impressed, that I had been recovering, and like like that whole thing decided, like I decided, whether I should stay doing the same thing or move. And like I had a friend that was dying from the AIDS virus, as a result of his addiction, and he was so good to me. His name was Tommy F, and he turned around and told me, either you move on change, or change will move you. And so, like I took that, like, like I had to, like, either, that I had to do something different. Like I had to take this advantage that, like that, change was coming. And like, as long as I stood in New York, I was gonna always be a hustler, and I probably would have ended up in jail. So I ended up, like, like during this time, like I try to have a relationship with my kids and my family. And you know um I did a little reaching out, but I guess it wasn't enough. And like, I decided to, like, leave New York, and I had a aunt and a cousin that was, having some trouble, and she was, in Mississippi, and she wanted me to move her stuff from her apartment to Mississippi. And I asked her if there was place over there for me, if I could make a different life over there. And she told me, yeah, you come down here, you can work for the casinos, you can, get your own place, you can do this. And like they told me, all these different things that I could do. And like but so, like I turned around and I packed up my stuff and I got into a car. And, you know, in my van, I had a van at the time, and I packed it up. And, and I moved all her stuff to Mississippi. And I relocated to Mississippi. And of course, in Mississippi, you need a license to take a shit here. Like you need a license to do anything. So like I couldn't do the same things that I did. And I went from like making like a lot of money to making like $300 a week, $300. Um, actually, I was making minimum wage at the time, and I think it was like $5 and change. And I learned to, adapt, according to my income and stuff like that. And I had a girlfriend at the time, and I moved her to Mississippi. I went to work. Before I did that, I actually went to work offshore, and I actually spent like 3 months offshore, working offshore. And I didn't know nothing about living offshore, and like I mean, city slicker in the Gulf of Mexico, living living in, you know, um, being on a boat, as a deckhand. And then next thing I knew, I was like living in, I was working as a deckhand. And I worked out there for like the 3 month stretch at one time. And then I, you know, saved up as much money as I could, and I ended up like going and taking that money and getting a place and moving to, you know, and finding a home, and then going back to New York and moving my girlfriend to this house. And I moved, and I moved her over here, and I started to make a life in Mississippi. And I'm still making meetings. I still went to a lot of meetings, in recovery. And I ended up going, to these meetings. And I've been making meetings for, you know, um, anyway, that was like 3 years in recovery, like my third year in recovery. And I was living in Mississippi now. And when I got here, it was like a twilight zone. I ended up like, like people would talk fast. I mean, people would talk really slow down here, and I would talk really fast. And people were always telling me, what, like, they couldn't understand what I was saying. And I would actually say what to them too, because I couldn't understand what they were saying. So I actually had to, I learned a lot about the way they talk down here and the way they do things in Mississippi, by going to meetings. And I learned, a different way. And I learned, and I worked offshore until I fell off the boat. And I actually have like a story, like I was working on the boat and they hired a female deckhand and she couldn't pick up the rope. And, like I turned around and got on the outside of the boat and lived, and got on the outside of the boat where the tires at. And I told her, give me that damn rope. And I grabbed the rope and I threw it. We were docking, and while we were docking, like the people at the dock turned around and said, "Don't go fall in now." And I ended up falling in, and I almost drowned. And I want to say, like, while I was drowning, I was trying to get back up, out of the water, and like before I knew it, like I ended up like not, you know, like um, like couldn't struggle anymore. And the next thing I knew, I was drowning, and I figured that this was the end and I was gonna die. And like I totally stopped fighting. I stopped trying to get up to the above the water, and the next thing I know was I floated up to the top. And I kind of look at it like letting go and letting God. Like I let go, I stopped fighting, and I let go, and I ended up going up to the top of the water. And I was able to be pulled out, out of the water. They pulled me up out of the water, and I was able to, continue to, like right after that, like a week or two, I ended up quitting, working offshore because that was a bad deal for me, and I started working in the casinos and started working, I had like two or three jobs because, like, I was trying to make the type of money that I was making in New York. And then, of course, that didn't happen. But, I always continued to have like two or three jobs. And I had this girlfriend and she got pregnant and I had a kid. And, like, I found out that she was doing certain things that she shouldn't have been doing. And I ended up like buying a mobile home, and I moved into the mobile home. And I also, when I got to Mississippi, like the first time, I ended up coming with a board driver's license. And I moved in, and I went, and I you know ended up paying like $300 for some license. And then I ended up like going, and like I never had to use the license. And then when I got to Mississippi, like I went and I needed a driver's license, and I went and I had to pay like $300 in tickets or something like that. And I ended up getting my driver's license, so I became legitimate. I was driving without a license. I was driving without insurance. Today I have insurance. I have a driver's license. I have everything that I need, and I've been I became completely legitimate. Like everything that I was like, I went from living an illegal life to living a legal one. I became a productive member of society. I completely became legitimate, in everything that I do, like as far as living. And I had quite a few jobs. I ended up having I started off with like three or four jobs. I ended up learning to do the dry cleaning business, and before I knew it, I became a manager, and so many things have become. And I ended up like I lost my home during Katrina. Like I was part of that Hurricane Katrina, and I lost everything during Katrina. And oh, by the way, like the girlfriend that I had, like we split up, and she had a kid, and I ended up taking the kid, and I've been raising my daughter ever since she was four years old. And she's 19. She's gonna be 19, and she's in college today, and she's done quite well. And I was able to, give her as much as I could, and like I did whatever I could, to anyway, we lost our stuff during Katrina, and you know, um, I had to restart all over again. And I always thought that, the only way that I would lose everything was for me to to use again. And like I didn't end up using, and I ended up losing everything, my home, you know, everything that I ever owned, you know, everything that I had accumulated in like 10 years, you know. By that time I had like 10 years of being clean, and like everything that I have ever you know had, I ended up losing. And you know, during that time, you know, I also had diabetes, you know, and you know, I had gained like 357 pounds, and you know, I had diabetes, and you know, you know, right after Katrina, like I was living in an RV, you know, because I was homeless, and you know, I moved in to the RV, and I was able to get some government, you know, help, and I was able to buy another mobile home. You know, I had gotten like 20 something dollars, 20,000 or 20 and change. I don't remember how much it was, but you know, I was able to take that money instead of, you know, like I couldn't believe that I had that much money. And I mean, I if I had, you know, like I thought, wow, you know, this, you know, if I was like really using, then this would have been like, you know, like I would have been out there. And I took the money and I did something good with it. And I ended up buying another home, and you know, I ended up buying a home, and you know, I found out I was, you know, diabetic. I was also diagnosed with the schizoaffective disorder, you know, and became disabled, you know, started collecting disability, and you know, was diabetic, you know, and you know, like I was looked like I was gonna die again, because like I was deteriorating from the diabetes. My legs were like busting, you know, they was, you know, busting the skin and everything and swelling up, and it looked like really bad. And like I found out, you know, like because of recovery and because practicing some principles, like I learned that they, you know, practicing the, you know, the first, you know, the steps, you know, like, you know, being powerless and finding a power greater than myself to restore me to sanity, and allowing that power greater than myself to help me. And like, you know, I ended up like finding out about, you know, some treatment that could help me lose some weight, because I had gained these 357 pounds, and that was causing my diabetes. And you know, I ended up like finding out about the gastro bypass, and you know, I took the steps to find that, you know, to do the research on that, and found out that I qualified for the operation, and I had to go to even another state to get the operation. Went through like, you know, all the medical treatments and all the, you know, the tests and everything, and you know, learned. I had to go like to classes and stuff to learn about how to eat all over again. And like I went and, you know, had this gastro bypass and had the operation. And you know, meanwhile I'm still raising my kid, you know. And you know, I took her to school. I made sure that she had a babysitter, you know, you know, like everything that a single parent does, you know. And you know, anyway, I had this bypass done, and I was able to lose a whole lot of weight. And as you can see, you know, I'm not 357 pounds anymore. I lost 160 pounds, you know, in like a year and a half. And I've been able to keep it off, you know, and I weigh like 206, 207 pounds today. And I no longer have diabetes. I don't have any high blood pressure. I used to take a shitload of medicine, and like I don't have to take a lot of that medicine anymore. And you know, I've, you know, been doing pretty good with my schizoaffective disorder, and I've had, you know, quite, you know, some success because of these 12 steps in my life, you know, because of Narcotics Anonymous and the program and the NA program, you know. And you know, I've made means everywhere. I've made means wherever I can make them, you know. And you know, I've had a lot of success. I even went back to school. I took an online course, and became, you know, an associate. I got an associate's in drug and alcohol counseling, And today I have my own car, I have my own insurance, I have my own driver's license, I have my own home, and I'm coming up on 20 March 11th of 2015. I'll have 26 years of being clean and recovery. And I skipped around a lot, and there's been a lot of struggles, like I've had a lot of struggles, and I've had a lot of situations, raising my kid, taking care of her. I had, she ended up having some complications, health complications, and I ended up having to take her to an operation in the hospital. I went through all of that, and I saw my kid being totally helpless. She had a tumor, and they had to remove it, and it was a benign tumor, which was good because it wasn't cancerous. But like I went through that, and I've had quite a few struggles, in recovery, and but I've been able to stay clean throughout all these situations, and with or without a job, with a job, without a job, um, made some meetings. I've had some, I've met some awesome people in recovery. I have some friends today that I've had for years that I wasn't able to, I didn't have, and I've been able to keep in touch with them, and they've been quite, you know, um, they've been really, um, you know, beautiful to me, and I want to say, I've worked steps. I practice, principles. I've had a sponsor that I've had for the over 10 years, for over the last 10 years, and he's helped me out a lot in my recovery. And I've had some, like I said, I've had some really good friends that I've, been able to stay in touch with in recovery. I have uh, a couple of sponsees, and they have helped me through my life too, just being able to be there for them and to do things with them, and practicing steps and working the steps and writing steps. And this program works. It totally works. And all I can, I kind of gave you the short version. There's been many things that I have actually gone through in recovery, and and I've been able to like get through it because of these principles, and I'm definitely not the same person that I was when I came into recovery. I was a scared individual, really, really scared. I felt like, a person who was in a corner, real scared of everything. And today I stand up for myself. I believe in myself. I love who I am today. I believe, I was ashamed of, the nationality that I was, and I'm no longer ashamed of who I am and what I've become. And my family wants me to, around. They always, asking me to come, hang out with them and be with them, and they invite me to events, and they don't have to hide the liquor or hide their drugs, from me. You know, um, I've had quite, a beautiful life, that I have today, and you know, I, I can say that I am, that I've learned to be happy, joyous, and free throughout this time, and I had quite a few events, and they haven't been able to put, to take me down, or make me, totally, to totally, you know uh you know I mean, like, the principles that I have today. I mean, I get speechless even talking about, all the success that I've had, and how much, things have changed. And being able to have such a great home, and such a wonderful daughter that has, that I've been able to raise. And so, like, that's the story of my life. I'm still single today. I haven't, been able to find, you know my, my soulmate, or someone that I can have a life with. But I am definitely having a wonderful life, and I just want to say to those people, you can do it. You can have a life worth living in recovery. And I want to say, that if nobody told you they love you today, I love you, and so does my high power. Thank you for letting me share.